Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to see you all today for our Bradford seminar. And our speaker today is Dr. Ajay Mathur. And I am going to take a minute or so to introduce him properly because he has a lot of sort of strings to his bow, a lot of things that he's done, and he's been in a lot of conversations over the years that I think he can bring insights from to this talk. So most recently, Dr. Mathur has been Director General of the International Solar Alliance, an international organization that was created by India and France and a few other organizations to promote solar energy, and he was there for at least, I think, had
4 years.
4 years. 4 years. But before that, Ajay was also head the Director General of the Energy Research Institute, which is sort of India's largest and most, probably sort of the largest and oldest energy think tank. It's a large sprawling organization with a lot of influence globally as well as in India, and Ajay headed that. Prior to that, he set up, or he actually brought to prominence the Bureau of Energy Efficiency in India. And I think in some ways, for those of us who work on energy in India, among the many legacies, the fact that India is really known for its energy efficiency programs, which have had, and the effects show up in the energy statistics very, very clearly. India has sort of become a leader in energy efficiency. I think that was in large part due to sort of Ajay's vision. He also brings a perspective on the climate negotiations in two ways. So he was part of India's negotiating team at Paris, but he's also been a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Climate Change in India for many years. And in fact, did such a good job at Paris that the French gave him an honor, which if I could, I would pronounce it in French, but I'll probably just give you the English translation. It's the Knight of the Legion of Honor, and I actually was at that ceremony. It was a very nice ceremony in Delhi. So I think Ajay was recognized for that. He also played a role in climate finance, and he was the first interim director of the Green Climate Fund when it was set up a decade and a bit ago. So he brings finance, he brings energy, he brings some diplomacy around solar and the negotiations. And also, I've been very privileged to have opportunities to interact with him many times over the years. And among the things he's brought to me is he also shared his favorite sourdough recipes during COVID. So Ajay is also a bread baker among his various accomplishments. And I'm really, really delighted to have you here today, Ajay, and look forward to all the conversations this afternoon and during the day today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Navroz and Ned and Chuck, thank you all very much for making this happen. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today and to discuss the issue of solarization with you. I will focus largely on the fact that we've got different kinds of recipes for different kinds of countries. But I'm going too far ahead. But before doing all of that, what I wanted to also say is that it's been an absolute privilege to be part of this journey for so many years. We have seen technology development occur. In fact, I was just told that there has been a rapprochement between India and China regarding solar technologies. We're also at the cusp of looking at India being both a global manufacturer of solar products, but also a large user of solar products. And one of the major questions that animates the discussion in India and in other developing countries is, what do you do about battery energy storage systems, or BESS? Because very, very clearly, and this is one of the differentiations between the countries, very, very clearly what we are seeing is that batteries are absolutely needed in countries where the energy demand is increasing. In countries where the energy demand is not increasing, for example, the US, where you will probably see demand increase in the future, but not happening right now, the per capita electricity consumption is more or less constant. It's increasing, but more or less constant. You have adequate capacity so that you can keep on adding solar during the day, and at night use the current capacity to meet people's needs. But where the energy demand, the electricity demand is increasing, you're looking at adding capacity. You do solar for the day, but what do you do during the night? You add more coal capacity. Well, if I add more coal capacity, it gives me electricity during the night, but also during the day. So do I do both? That's a bit of a challenge. And consequently, the emphasis in the large developing countries has been on developing battery energy storage. So you decrease the costs and increase the efficiency of batteries. And in fact, one of the things that I am very concerned about right now is that with the decrease in spending on battery research that occurs because of the current political thinking in the administration in the US, what will the impact be on global development? Will it mean that other countries will take it up, or will it mean that the entire process slows down? There are two other things that I'll focus on, but what I'd like to do is therefore talk about the fact that we have seen a huge demand increase. We have seen a huge supply increase. But what we notice is that this is largely happening in the OECD countries in China. In the other countries, it's relatively smaller. The second point that I'd like to make is that, as far as I was concerned, getting renewable energy round-the-clock parity with climate, with fossil fuel electricity is a great thing. I thought that that was the end, but it isn't. Now you are having issues on how to scale it up, and I'll talk a little bit about this. What has worked in India is that, if you looked at 2010, we were still at about 20, 30 megawatts. I'm not saying 20,000 megawatts, 20, 30 megawatts of solar electricity. Clearly, the policies in these years and bringing it to 73,000 megawatts have been kind of effective. And they occurred in a time when the demand for electricity has been increasing, and yet we have been able to meet this through solar and wind. These policies are of great importance to other developing countries. But in most of the developing countries, what we started with was that the capacity, both human and institutional, was limited and continues to be limited. And the second was that the political will to push solar was limited. And therefore, what was felt was that there was a public policy need to push solar a lot more. And that is why at COP21 we were created, sorry, not me, I shouldn't associate myself with the International Solar Alliance anymore, but the International Solar Alliance was created to help push this agenda. Now, the IS experience has shown that there are different strokes for different people. And I talked about the developed and the large developing countries, but we also see the developing countries where the grids are not fully formed, fully mature, as being the third, and the small island state as being the fourth group of countries which need their own policies. We also have a certain amount of learning, not complete, but certain amount of learning as far as how do you create public demand and in turn convert it into political action so that upscaling of solar may occur. All of this makes great sense, but ultimately investment has to flow. So the last thing that I want to focus on is focus on the kinds of methods which are important to make investment flow for solar across the world. Now, let me focus on the first. Is this clear? It's not the best of slides, but what we tried to see is that across the world you see that solar investment has dramatically increased. We see that the total demand of electricity, total demand for electricity has increased over the last 13 years, between 2010 and 2023, from 21 gigawatt hours to about 30 gigawatt hours, about 50%, or 38% to be very exact. And we have seen the share, within this increasing demand, we have seen the share of wind and solar electricity rise from less than 2%, 1.8% to be exact, to something of the order of more than 13%. So this means that, one, the pie increased, two, the share of renewables in the pie also increased. In short, the investment in clean energy has been growing up. It has been growing from about 300 million in 2015 to, and that's, please note that that is for 2015, not 2010, to something of the order of approximately 800 billion in 2023. It's probably crossed a billion by now, a billion a year from now, by now. The point I'd like to leave you with is solar is growing. In fact, there was a paper produced by the University of Essex Science Energy Center which was provocatively titled, "Is solar inevitable?" And the answer was yes, it is. That's where the world stands. You're seeing a greater and greater influence of renewable energy, particularly solar and wind, influencing the global growth. But this growth is amazingly distorted. We see that something of the order of nearly 80% of the solar electricity, of the renewable electricity, is from the OECD countries and China. However, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, you can actually count India, Brazil, Taiwan. Those are the countries where the growth is happening. All of Africa, including South Africa, accounts for just 3% of the investment in solar, and therefore the capacity that they have. So we, at the ISA, we carried out meetings with a large number of investors. I think something of the order of about 100 global investors. And what they said was that the reason they were not investing outside the OECD and China was that they thought that the risks were too high. And the risks were of three kinds. One is getting the money out, returns. How do I ensure that I get returns? The second was, will there be an adequate number of projects? I'm not going to go into a country just because of one project. I want to have a pipeline of projects. And the third thing that they said was, for a very large number of countries, we do not see the regulations, for example, private sector investment allowing a power purchase agreement. These countries have traditionally had power purchase agreements. They haven't had, but they've got investments being made by the governments in the power sector. So therefore, we looked at three kinds of interventions. We looked at how do you get finance to flow, address the issue of perceived risk. Because I call it a perceived risk because when you looked at the solar loans, for example, in Africa, the repayment rate was like 98%. It's 96% in India, it's 94% in Europe. So clearly this is an issue of perceived risk. Agreed that the total, this was on a very low baseline, but the fact remains that the repayments are far better than what people think them to be. If it is a perceived risk, and this is an issue I'll come to again and again, the answer is guarantees. How do you guarantee the money that goes into investment in these countries? Because guarantees is the best way to get me off a perceived risk. I'll use it once, twice, and then I'll say, why do I need to pay a premium to get this risk premium? And I'll step out of it. And as soon as I step out of it, I'm okay. So the best way for a risk guarantee mechanism to work is that you actually don't need it after 3 to 5 years. And consequently, the International Solar Alliance is creating right now a global solar facility, which is starting with guarantees for decentralized renewable applications, DRE applications in Africa to start with. And then will enhance its focus to Asia and the Pacific and to Latin America. The second issue can be addressed by identifying solar startups who can create the kinds of projects, one after the other, that we were looking at. And therefore, at the International Solar Alliance, we created the Solar X program, in which we were identifying solar startups. And the way we did it was to first we worked with Africa, then with Asia and Pacific, and this year with Latin America, identifying companies which had been around for, say, 3 years, up to 8 years, had a technology that people were willing to buy. They were paying for it. And therefore, at least as far as their operational balance sheet was concerned, it was positive. And the third was that they had the option, or whatever they were doing had large scale application. So there was a possibility for enhancing the amount of solar activities that they did. What we are doing is not providing them money, but providing them access to capital. So we introduced them to various venture capital partners. That's a big part. The second is we introduced them to technology companies, so that particularly as far as maintenance is concerned, they establish the kinds of networks that are needed for high quality technology and high quality maintenance to occur, and the training of the people who are needed for this job. And the third thing is brand creation. We want these guys to be the Amazons of tomorrow, as far as solar products and services are concerned, in their own geographies or even beyond that. So what we learned was that there was a huge amount of risks involved. The third risk was that of currency depreciation. We haven't yet made something which directly addresses currency depreciation, but we are working with the World Bank on this. And the goal is that if these become eligible for climate credits, then the credits are paid in foreign currency. Can those foreign currency credits be used to reduce the risk that the currency depreciation risk that occurs? But as I said, that's something which is still under development. The point I'd like to leave you with is that there is a huge risk perception as far as investment in various developing countries is concerned, and that's something that we'll have to look at. So we looked at markets where growth was occurring, and one of those markets obviously was India. We have seen a huge decline in the price of solar panels, but interestingly enough, also of batteries. And you see the kind of change that has occurred. It's been in excess of 75% in the last 10 years between 2013 and 2023. So very, very clearly, we are moving in the right direction. As I said earlier, what this means is that there are certain kinds of policies, there are certain kinds of procurement pushes that seem to have worked. And we are now looking at how do we provide these policies, how do we transfer these policies to other developing countries so that they also can take advantage of solarization in the years ahead. Now, what has happened is that, as I was mentioning, we have seen that the price of coal power stations are still needed because of the growing demand for electricity. the price of solar electricity over the past 2 or 3 years has been somewhere between 5.11 and 6.31 rupees per kilowatt hour. That is the price at which was found from what the regulators established for these plants. And at the same time, we have had relatively large procurements of renewable electricity round the clock. RTC stands for round the clock. And this is a word that you'll hear me saying again and again. What is important is that you need to follow the load profile across the day. The load profile could be maximum either during the day or late at night. What we have seen is that in rural areas, it's peaks during the afternoon, and in urban areas where there are lots of air conditioners, it peaks early or late at night. What it therefore says is that if you need electricity, then you need to provide renewable electricity, then you need to be able to provide this entire demand. Remember, we are looking at an increase in demand, not just meeting the current needs. And if you're looking at an increase in demand, then there's a straightforward challenge. How do I ensure that this is cheaper than doing coal alone? And to me, this solar plus wind plus storage, which was in these 4 projects, tells me what is the way ahead. I had actually thought that as we come to today, a bank will say, well, solar plus wind plus storage was cheaper. Why are you even doing coal? And the answers they get are of 3 kinds. And these answers focus on the fact, I'll just come to this in a moment. These answers focus on 3 kinds of issues: of money, of land, and of adequate transmission lines. I want to spend a few minutes on this. While the cost of solar round the clock in India is cheaper than from coal, the investment cost is more than double. To give you a rule of thumb, about 100 megawatts of coal capacity would cost you about 9 billion rupees. The same amount of capacity, solar, wind, and batteries, which will provide you the same amount of electricity but cheaper, would cost you approximately double of that, about 19.2 billion. What this means is clearly and this is understandable. After all, there is no operating costs. Operating costs, you need to buy coal or you need to buy gas or whatever. That costs approximately 50% of what the cost of the coal plant itself costs. Here you don't have those costs, but you need the investment money upfront. And this becomes a challenge because right now approximately 15% of the Indian investment occurs in the power sector. If you're talking of doubling that, you're talking of 30% of Indian investment occurring. Not a deal breaker, but clearly you can hear the sucking sound coming out of other sectors, money coming out of other sectors. This is a challenge. It has answers. Can we make the money go twice as fast? So right now you have 7-year loans. Can we make them 3.5 years loans? Yes, we can. Because solar or wind projects are done in 2 years instead of 4 or 5 years. So you set them up in 2 years, you have a 3rd year of seeing what are the kinds of revenues they get. And once they get enough revenues, you can create, you can convert that into bonds. And people like me would invest our pension money in those because we get regular returns. And at that point of time, once you have funded it through bonds, you can return the money to the bank. And the bank can then provide investment to yet another renewable energy project. This is just one answer, but you can have multiple answers. I'd like you to focus on the kinds of possible configurations that are possible. The second is the issue of land. There are relatively few pieces of land that are available for solar and wind and storage. There's one in Gujarat called Khavda, and there you have capacity of about 30,000 megawatts, 30 gigawatts. But clearly the demand is much more. And I would like to see, similarly you have in Rajasthan, you have in Karnataka, but all of them add up to something of the order of 50,000 megawatts, 50 gigawatts. I would like to see every state focus on this. Can they? Yes, they can. We have models. For example, in Tamil Nadu, when 20 years ago wind first came, we saw that people were buying entire pieces of land for solar. But then very quickly moved to buying land only below where the wind tower was and the roads connecting them. And now what they've moved to is that they invest in leasing out the land. And farmers are pretty savvy. They say, this is the amount of money that you'll earn. I need X% of it, and therefore we will get into a lease for Y amount. It is possible that similar kinds of models allow leasing of land, and depending on the kinds of dynamics can also result in the kinds of arrangements under which agriculture or animal husbandry can be done so that local use of land continues instead of there being a tension between land on the one side and its use only for renewables on the other side. What I'm saying is what is possible, we will need to work this out in principle to see what is possible. The third issue is that of transmission lines. If you've got solar at one place, you've got wind at a third place, and if you've got batteries at a third place, then you've got 3 transmission lines, all operating at what? 30% capacity utilization. But if you got them all at one place, then you can have one line which operates at 90% capacity utilization. That's obviously an economic benefit. But more important than that, you can plan transmission lines. This has become a huge problem because making a line takes 3-4 years. Doing a solar plant or a wind plant takes 2 years. And therefore, you can have 1 or 2 years in which you have the plant, but you don't have any way to take the energy out. In my view, I mean, this is what we learned from Khavda or Badla in Gujarat, or I'm forgetting what the name of the one in Karnataka was, that you can actually have transmission lines built beforehand. And then they take on the, people who win tenders go to these places and say, I want to set up a wind farm, I want to set up a round-the-clock renewable facility here, and they say, okay, this is what the amount of lease you have to pay. They get people together, the states get people together, they get the land together, and they work out a lease rate, which then becomes competitive. Because yes, if it's closer to the urban centers where the greatest demand is, and there's a lower price, it helps. It could be further away if the leasing cost is less, and therefore there will be a competition between these. So what we have learned is that round-the-clock renewable electricity is now viable. However, the financial, institutional, and people capacity is limited. We see this as a high risk for investment, and we see a limited development of it at the project level, particularly as far as the developing world is concerned. And this, therefore, leads to the second issue on how do we address these challenges. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the ways, and I thank Navroz for the introduction, we created the International Solar Alliance at the COP in Paris, COP21 in 2015, and with the explicit aim of promoting global solarization. As an organization, the Solar Alliance has moved well. It has got an increasing number of member countries. There is a treaty that you need to accede to, and today we have, well, this 122 is at the end of 2024. Since then, at least one more country has joined. So now, currently, there are 123 members. And more importantly, the number of countries with whom the ISA has an active engagement, working either on regulatory capacity, or working on this guarantee facility, or working on the development of human capacity, all of it has increased. So today there are about 94 countries where ISA has a program with those countries. The one on the left gives you some of the numbers that have happened. I'd especially like to focus on, there are 27 demonstration projects. And I come back to this because we saw that demonstration projects convince people that renewable energy can provide them with jobs, it provides them with incomes, and are therefore useful for them. And they in turn focus on creating the political will to upscale those programs. So for example, you will see some of the examples I have later on. When you look at, I'm going to give you an example, Bhutan. We looked at a solar cold room. And the Ministry of Agriculture said, we'll put the solar cold room next to the airport. And the technology it uses is it uses solar power to create cooling during the day, and uses that cooling also to chill water. And the chilled water provides cool during the night. They put it next to the airport. Orchids and asparagus came there. They were put into the cold rooms, and next morning were flown out by aircraft to markets in Bangkok or elsewhere. The key issue is that this excited the Ministry of Agriculture, this excited the Prime Minister. And now Bhutan has a program for putting solar cold storages across the country wherever people think that they make economic sense. I can talk of similar stories in Ethiopia, in Guyana, in that neighboring island called Cuba, where we have seen that because of political action, we are seeing a huge upscaling occurring as far as solar is concerned, but that political will has been created by these demo projects, which have helped in creating a public demand for more and more of the same. So over a period of time, we have seen what makes sense. So for example, in-country programs are very important. So the International Solar Alliance has got national focal points in every country. And these national focal points are either the number 1 or number 2 people in the ministries of energy in those countries, not in the ministries of environment. They work on identifying what needs to be done. And the actions, the demo projects, for example, and I'll talk about more in the next few minutes, they focus on the kinds of interventions which make sense to the energy departments of those countries. Now, because they're high up energy officials, they're also concerned about managing their bosses, which is the energy ministers or the prime ministers, and therefore they enable the kind of linkage that we feel is important for enabling the large-scale replication of solar in these countries. Most of these programs are focused around creating enabling environments. And I talked of the Global Solar Program, which helps finance flow, which talks of providing the regulatory support. So we do training programs, and I think right now it's about 11 countries, 7 in Africa, 1 in the Pacific, which is a regional program, and 3 in the Latin American region, which identify the kinds of regulatory changes that need to be made in order for private sector investment in solar. I would like to emphasize that the regulatory change is made by the countries themselves. What this means is that you need people. So one of the things that has happened in parallel is the development of what we call as they're called STAR centers, Solar Technology and Applications Resource Centers. That's, I think, what it stands for. The STAR centers are they're in-country centers, and they're about developing local capacity. Obviously, they work on developing the capacity to design and manage a solar plant, obviously. But they also work on developing the kind of capacity that is needed at the policy level and at the regulatory level. It is these guys who then work on creating the regulatory change that is needed in those countries. We don't want international consultants parachuting in these countries, making the kinds of changes and going back. Yes, it takes time. Believe you me, these kinds of programs, the first STAR centers were started about 3 years ago. They became functional last year. There were 10 of them. This year again, 10 more will be started. But that is the kind of time that it takes for governments to own it up and for them to say that this makes sense for us politically and economically. At the same time, I talked of the Global Solar Program. I talked of the SolarX program, which helps enabling entrepreneurs, reducing investment risks, and so on. But a third part is analytics and advocacy. How do we help countries? So there is a huge amount of literature which is out there about energy in general, and the IEA has been a very, very strong proponent of solar growth. But if you look at the IEA literature, there's a lot of data which is pushed into the rest of the world. Because of our linkage with these national focal points, we get data from these countries, and therefore we annually bring out updates on solar technology, on solar markets, and solar investments. We also, for example, bring out annual reports on the ease of doing solar, which is mapping how the local policies are changing. If the policies are becoming more investor friendly. And it obviously helps that you provide countries, if they do da, 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 then they go higher up on the ease of doing solar scale. That has been amazingly useful in helping convince countries on the kinds of actions that need to be done. We also looked at what will it take for example, for green hydrogen to take off, or for batteries to take off, or for solar recycling to be considered. Those are the kinds of reports that we do in order to do the country level assessment or the country level programs that we would then be launching. All of this is great, but at the end of the day, we want to tell people that solar is an option. And therefore, things like the ISA assembly, at which obviously ministers come, but the next day is an interaction between technology, finance, and the ministers. That helps in creating a global awareness. Last year, we began something called the International Solar Festival, which was focused on building up the kinds of applications. So you get communities, you get youth to participate in it. We also found the need to bring in the private sector, and therefore a CEO caucus which looks at the CEOs of solar manufacturers, solar developers, and solar financiers. These are the kinds of interventions that are needed. So consequently, what has happened is that over a period of time, the various organizations which fund solar in particular are looking at ISA as providing the initial training, the initial capacity building, the initial business models about what would work. And then they step in with what works. So for example, with the World Bank, we have an agreement that we move in earlier, they are part of it, and as the need for upskilling occurs, they come in with large programs. So whether it's the World Bank or the African Development Bank or the Asian Development Bank, we work with them, and they in turn pull in the private sector. It has become we are not a UN body, but for all practical purposes, we are seen as a UN body. I want to focus on one issue, which is the issue that at the end of the day, political will is about public demand. And public demand, we create various kinds of demonstration projects and enable the movement of this public demand to become political action. The way we have done it is through demonstration projects, and as I said, the national focal points have been at the heart of the discussion on what kind of demonstration project is needed. So we looked at solarizing a hospital in Mauritius. We looked at the solar cold storage in Bhutan. We looked at a solar water pump in Mali. We looked at a solar generator, so solar and diesel in Guyana, and we looked at a solar rooftop system in the Maldives. These are examples of the kinds of ways in which people who are either their incomes increase. You can obviously think of if I have a solar cold storage close to me, my income as a farmer would increase because the amount of food I have to throw away decreases. If I get electricity for more than the time I can from the grid, it becomes a huge benefit to me. So therefore, rooftop systems make great sense. I believe that it is these two reasons, better supply of electricity and the ability to enhance incomes, that drives solar in developing countries. And that is what is able to convert the demonstration projects into political action. I'd like to leave this idea with you, and I would like many more inputs about the kinds of ways through which at the same time you can meet climate mitigation goals, but at the same time you can meet goals. For example, we have looked at two of them, there could be more. We have looked at income generation and a greater reliability of electricity supply as examples. Now, I'd like to end with what I began with, which is that we see that there are four different kinds of country archetypes. There is the developed countries where the electricity demand per capita is more or less constant, where there is an adequate capacity for meeting electricity needs, and therefore the emphasis has been on the greater and greater efficiency of solar cell operation, so that you can use them during the day, and at night you meet the need through the existing capacity. This is what is happening in this country, for example, and my belief is that this will continue to occur in the years ahead, irrespective of what the country says, what the administration says, because during the day, solar electricity is cheaper. It is very, very different in the developing countries. And in the large developing countries, you're seeing growth of electricity occurring at approximately 5% a year. And if you're looking at growth, then you're looking at round-the-clock electricity. And clearly, reduction in battery prices or increase in efficiency of battery prices becomes the key. And what I fear, as I said earlier, is about the fact whether battery technology development will suffer as a result of this administration's work, or will it not? Will it shift to other countries? The third group of countries is countries where the grid is not developed. And what we found was that if the grid had to go for more than 10 kilometers, then it makes much greater sense to have solar microgrids. Because solar microgrids, solar panels plus batteries, provide electricity at a cheaper cost than does grid extension. But there are political economy challenges. And the political economy challenges include the fact that we are looking at meeting those demands at the same time as increasing the cost of making distribution companies is now on the private sector rather than on the public sector. And therefore, we are looking at how do you create the public-private partnerships for this to happen. The other issue is that most of these guys who don't have access to electricity from the grid are getting electricity from diesel gensets. And therefore, there is a huge vested interest of diesel importers in these countries. And that is something that you need to fight against. And in my own view, if the diesel importers become solar cell importers, or solar panel importers, that's so much to anybody's benefit. The fourth and the last archetype that we see are the small island developing countries. If you go to Fiji, or you go to any island, if you have to go from one island to another, how do you go? By boat. And that boat runs on diesel. Where are the electric boats? Well, they will be developed in the US or in India. The local capacity, either the people capacity or the financial capacity in the islands is not there. What is the kind of model do we create to develop either the electric boats or, say, gensets, which can replace the diesel gensets in these islands? They have very specific needs. And the kinds of collaboration that we are talking about would be very different. We see that the kind of technologies in each of these four archetypes is very different. We see the kinds of technology development challenges as being very different. We see the kind of collaboration challenges as being very different. We therefore foresee that what you will see is that each of these four archetypes of countries will follow very, very different paths as we go ahead. I would like to end here, and what I would like to say is that while we have seen the demand for solar electricity go, we strongly believe that public demand is essential in order to meet the income generating needs. That's number one. The second is that while you may reach the point of cost equivalence, the issue of land, lines, and investment remains. And the third is that we believe that these archetypes are important. These four archetypes that I just talked about. We hope that we will together be able to meet the kinds of needs that these countries have and be able to provide the kind of varied public policy and institutional development needs that these four archetypes of countries will need. I thank you for your attention. I do realize that there is very little time left for questions and answers, but Navroz, I am in your hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ajay. It's really nice to hear both the sort of concepts and the lessons you've drawn, as well as the practical sort of experiences of your many years at ISA. I think we have some time for questions, so maybe let's just be
they offer job opportunities and also income for the people rather than offering immediate climate change advantages. Is this based on your personal or institutional anecdotes? Can you specify how did you?
This was something. Sorry, we can take 2 or 3 questions. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Historically and going forward, what do you see the development?
Yeah, and did you consider scenarios where you could enable some amount of coal capacity reliability of the system? And how does that affect cost?
Okay.
Maybe we'll take those 3
Right.
the next round.
Okay. In a sense, one of the things that we have learned, and this has been a learning that I have personally done and institutionally also, is that the investment occurs because of, let me say, political action, which means upscaling essentially, of these occurs only if the government believes that there is a demand for it. And the demand for it occurs when people see a benefit to themselves. They don't see a climate benefit directly. So, whereas you see a political move towards accepting climate change as a driver in most developed countries, you don't see it in most of the developing countries. And therefore, we need to build it up from public demand to a political action occurring as a result of that public demand. So that's the quick answer to your question. The second question was around the off-takers. So the off-takers are very different. In the case of the large solar panels, the large solar farms, and in the case of the DRE, the decentralized renewable installations. In the case of the solar farms, the off-takers are typically the electricity distribution companies. And there the kind of problem that occurs is that these distribution companies sell electricity at prices that are less than what it costs to generate. And therefore, the state subsidizes, either implicitly or explicitly, the state subsidizes this electricity. And you need to work your way that solar gets the same subsidies that is being offered by others. This is exacerbated by the fact that the current fossil fuel generation is largely fueled by the fossil fuel sector, and it is financed by governments. Now, renewable energies are financed by the private sector, and therefore there's this huge problem that occurs. And you can imagine how it happened in that island next to you, where they say, why on earth should we subsidize the private sector? And the question is, well, don't subsidize them, subsidize the distribution company. At least that's the way it worked in Cuba. I presume it will work similarly in other countries. As far as DRE is concerned, the power purchase agreement is with the local entrepreneur. This calls for the banks who are financing this to be a lot more sophisticated in how they look at the risk assessment of your off-taker. Because you will need financial support to make, for example, a solar cold room, or the emphasis, therefore, is, we found it very strange, but in hindsight, it isn't. One of the greatest demand was by the banking sector from across the developing world for us to provide training programs to the bankers. First, it was about solar, and now it is about, tell us how do we look at risk in various solar investments that are asked for us. So this is clearly something that you need to build capacity on. The third is on the co-location of solar. So the co-location is not that important if you have a grid that is large. But if you don't have a grid that is large, then obviously co-location is an advantage as long as land is available. We find that land is often the resource constraint. And finding, because every piece of land in the world, in the developing world at least, has some kind of competing use. And finding a way that the local people benefit and solar or renewables also occur, that becomes the challenge. So the co-location by itself is not as much of a challenge. It's actually a good thing, but the availability of land is where the challenge lies.
Thank you. We probably have time for two more quick questions. Tim, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I just had a very quick question. With battery technology today, is solar competitive with coal for round-the-clock electricity in most countries?
And maybe getting to 90% is good enough. Any final thoughts?
Okay. So the very, very, very quick answer is that actually it depends on the load profile. So if you're looking at approximately 4 to 6 hours of energy storage that you need, it is probably cost effective. But if you're looking at 12 hours, as the need typically is, it's not cost effective. The other part of the question is there a well-developed grid or not? In other words, is the grid largely for home purposes, or is it for industrial agriculture and other purposes as well? That defines, so if it is a very diversified grid, the chances are that it will probably be cost effective. If it is not diversified, it would not be. Only solar and batteries is the other challenge. Only solar and batteries are cost effective when you are looking at diesel gensets as the competitive technology. But if you're looking at coal as the technology, then it is not. So I'm sorry, it's not a clear answer, but
Nothing is.
Great, thank you so much, Ajay. I think we have actually had a fair bit of clarity, and where we haven't had clarity, we've had productive sort of, stirring of the pot and stirring of energy. So thank you so much. Really, really wonderful to host you here, and thank you for taking the time to share your questions.